I discovered my fiancée was stealing my designs with her ex, and now they're going to pay. My name is Robert Stark, and until 3 months ago, I was living the dream as a rising star in sustainable architecture. I had innovative ideas, a beautiful fiancée named Elise, and a future mapped out like one of my perfect blueprints. Then I found my groundbreaking design concept published in an architectural journal under her ex-boyfriend Julian's name. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only was Elise cheating on me emotionally, but they were systematically draining our joint accounts and stealing the work I had poured my heart and soul into. When confronted, she looked me straight in the eyes and called me paranoid, unstable, overworked. Classic gaslighting from someone I thought I knew. Most men would explode with rage, file lawsuits, burn bridges. I chose a different path. I appeared broken while secretly planning my revenge. I created flawed designs for them to steal, knowing the structural weaknesses would become apparent at exactly the right moment. While they believe I'm spiraling into depression, I've been meticulously documenting everything, building an airtight case. They think they've won. They're wrong. In 3 days at their big industry showcase, my perfect revenge will destroy them both professionally and personally. They stole my designs, my money, and my trust. I won't just take back what's mine. I'll take everything they value. Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Robert Stark stood at the edge of the rooftop garden, surveying the Seattle skyline as the evening sun cast long shadows across his latest architectural triumph. The Emerald Tower, with its pioneering vertical gardens and rainwater recycling system, had just earned him the prestigious Thornton Sustainability Award. At 34, he had already accomplished what many architects spent lifetimes pursuing: creating spaces that were both beautiful and environmentally responsible. His fiancée Elise glided toward him, champagne flutes in hand, her black cocktail dress catching the golden light. With her auburn hair twisted elegantly and her confident smile, she looked every bit the successful marketing executive she was. "To the man of the hour," she said, handing him a glass. "And to us." Robert smiled, plinking his glass against hers. "To us and our future." He meant it. In 6 months, they would be married in this very garden. Life felt perfectly aligned, like a building where every beam and column was exactly where it should be. "Mr. Stark," a voice called from behind them. Robert turned to see his assistant Mai hurrying toward them, tablet in hand. At 26, Mahjong was brilliant, organized, and fiercely loyal. Her sleek bob haircut and perpetual look of determination had become familiar fixtures at Horizon Designs over the past 3 years. "Sorry to interrupt," Mai said, glancing apologetically at Elise, "but Professor Hargrove is looking for you. He says it's important." Robert nodded. Professor Hargrove had been his mentor since graduate school, the man who had first recognized his talent and pushed him towards sustainable design. Now in his 70s, the professor remained one of the most respected voices in architectural education. "Go," Elise said, touching his arm. "I need to mingle anyway. Julian mentioned some potential clients he wants me to meet." At the mention of Julian, Robert felt a slight tension in his shoulders. Julian Reed was an architectural critic for Design Forward magazine, known for his scathing reviews and industry connections. He was also Elise's ex-boyfriend from before she met Robert. They had remained friends, which Robert had accepted as part of Elise's professional network. Still, something about the man's perpetual smirk bothered him. He found Professor Hargrove by the bar, bow tie slightly askew as always. The older man's eyes lit up as Robert approached. "There he is, the future of sustainable architecture." Hargrove clapped him on the shoulder. "Remarkable work, Robert. Your mother would have been extraordinarily proud." The mention of his mother sent a familiar pang through Robert's chest. She had died during his final year of undergraduate studies, never seeing him graduate or establish his career. But her influence, her belief in creating beautiful things that honored the environment, shaped everything he did. "Thank you, Professor. That means more than you know." Hargrove lowered his voice. "I wanted to tell you personally, the Westlake Committee has approached me about your availability for their downtown revitalization project. It would be your biggest commission yet." Robert felt a surge of excitement. The Westlake project was exactly the kind of work he had dreamed of, a chance to transform an entire city block into a sustainable urban oasis. "Send me the details. I'll start sketching concepts tonight." The following weeks passed in a creative blur. Robert worked late into the evenings, filling his sketchbooks with ideas for the Westlake project. It was during one of these late nights at his home office that he first noticed something amiss. He was searching for preliminary sketches he had made the previous evening. Unique cantilevered structures that would maximize natural light while minimizing environmental impact. The sketches were gone. He searched every drawer, every folder, but they had vanished. "Elise," he called out, "have you seen my Westlake sketches? The ones with the cantilever concept?" She appeared in the doorway in her robe, looking tired. "No. You probably filed them somewhere and forgot." "I never misfile sketches," he said, frowning. "You've been working non-stop for weeks. Even you can make mistakes, Robert." There was an edge to her voice that seemed disproportionate to the situation. He let it go, recreating the sketches from memory. But over the next few weeks, other small inconsistencies began to accumulate. Design notes missing. References to structures he had innovated appearing in industry conversations without attribution. And most troublingly, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. Small enough to be easily overlooked, but adding up to significant amounts. "Did you authorize a transfer of $5,000 last Thursday?" he asked Elise over breakfast one morning. She didn't look up from her phone. "Yes, investment opportunity. I'll explain later. Heading into a meeting now." She kissed him quickly and was gone before he could press further. That afternoon might knock on his office door, her expression unusually somber. "What is it?" Robert asked, recognizing her concern immediately. She hesitated, then placed the latest issue of Design Forward on his desk. Page 47. Robert flipped to the page and felt his blood freeze. There in full color was a design concept virtually identical to his cantilevered structure for Westlake. The article praised Julian Reed for his groundbreaking approach to urban sustainability. "This is my design," Robert said quietly. "These are the missing sketches." Mike nodded. "I recognized it immediately. The article says he's been developing it for months." Robert spent the rest of the day in a daze, questions swirling. How had Julian gotten his designs? Who would have access to them? The obvious answer was too painful to consider. That evening, instead of confronting Elise immediately, he decided to investigate further. While she showered, he checked their online banking records. What he found made him physically ill. Regular transfers, always under $10,000, had been flowing from their joint account to an offshore account for months. Further digging revealed the account was registered to a shell company, with ties to both Julian Reed and Elise. When Elise emerged from the shower, Robert was sitting in the living room, hands clasped tightly together. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled despite the turmoil inside him. "Can it wait until morning? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." He pulled up the banking records on his tablet and turned it toward her. "I'd like you to explain these transfers." Her expression flickered, surprise, then something calculated. "Those are the investments I mentioned. They're completely illegitimate." "To a shell company you share with Julian?" Her demeanor changed instantly. "You're spying on me now. Going through my personal finances?" "Our joint accounts are hardly your personal finances," Robert replied, maintaining his composure. "And you didn't answer about Julian." She crossed her arms. "You're being paranoid. Julian is helping me with some side investments, that's all. And I'm missing designs, the ones he's now claiming credit for in Design Forward." Elise laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Robert, you're overworked. Julian has been developing those concepts independently for ages. Any similarities are coincidental." The gaslighting was so blatant it momentarily stunned him. He had expected denials, even anger, but not this common version of reality. "I need some air," he said, standing up. He couldn't trust himself to continue the conversation without losing control. The next morning, he contacted a private investigator recommended by a colleague. Within a week, the investigator delivered a file containing photographs of Elise and Julian meeting at hotels, transcripts of conversations discussing Robert's designs, and evidence of their plan to gradually drain his accounts while stealing his intellectual property. In his office alone, Robert spread the evidence across his desk. The betrayal was complete and meticulously documented. His initial instinct was to confront them immediately, to expose everything and watch their scheme collapse. He drafted a cease and desist letter to Design Forward. He compiled financial evidence for their bank's fraud department. He even began writing a public statement. But as the initial shock faded, a different approach took shape in his mind. Immediate exposure would bring some satisfaction, but it wouldn't recover what was lost. Worse, in the messy public battle that would follow, his reputation could suffer regardless of the outcome. No, his mother had always taught him that patience was the architect's greatest virtue. Great buildings weren't created in moments of passion, but through careful, deliberate planning. He deleted the cease and desist letter. He put away the financial evidence. He began to formulate a different kind of blueprint, one for perfect, calculated revenge. At home, he began the performance of his life. He became distracted, irritable, prone to forgetting appointments. He mentioned nightmares, insomnia. He spoke of creative blocks and doubts about his abilities, all while meticulously documenting every interaction with Elise, every suspicious movement, every missing file. "I'm worried about you," Elise said one evening, her concern so convincing that for a moment he almost doubted his evidence. "Maybe you should talk to someone. Take some time off." "Maybe you're right," Robert replied, allowing his voice to crack slightly. "Maybe I am falling apart." And so began his calculated descent, architectural collapse designed with perfect precision, every broken beam and crumbled wall exactly where he wanted it. Robert Stark canceled 3 client meetings in 1 week, claiming exhaustion. He left sketches unfinished and design proposals half completed. At the office, he'd stare blankly at his computer screen, muttering about structural impossibilities that any first-year architecture student could resolve. He drank coffee constantly but ate little, ensuring dark circles formed beneath his eyes and his clothes began to hang loosely on his frame. "I'm just tired," he'd tell concerned colleagues. "I need more time." But behind this carefully orchestrated facade of deterioration, Robert's mind had never been sharper. Each night, after Elise fell asleep, he would slip out of bed and drive to a modest 1-bedroom apartment he'd rented across town under a false name. The place was sparsely furnished, just a desk, drafting table, computer, and single bed. The walls, however, were covered with notes, photographs, and timelines mapping out every aspect of Elise and Julian's betrayal. This secret workspace became his sanctuary, the place where he could drop the mask of despair and channel his anger into meticulous planning. He installed a state-of-the-art security system and paid for the fastest internet connection available. Here, he wasn't the broken architect spiraling into professional irrelevance. He was a man constructing the perfect trap. Robert's first architectural task in his revenge blueprint was creating the false designs. He knew Julian would continue stealing his work, so he decided to provide something worth stealing, something that would ultimately destroy Julian's credibility. For 3 nights straight, he worked without breaks, designing a revolutionary-seeming high-rise that appeared to solve several persistent sustainability challenges in urban architecture. To the untrained eye, the design was flawless, innovative, and potentially career-defining. But Robert had integrated several critical yet nearly invisible flaws: load-bearing calculations that were subtly off, ventilation systems that would fail under specific weather conditions, and material specifications that would lead to structural weaknesses within 5 years. An expert review would eventually catch these problems, but only after construction had begun, when changes would be astronomically expensive and publicly embarrassing. On the 4th night, as he made final adjustments to the falsified structural calculations, his phone rang. It was Mai. "Robert, I know it's late, but can we talk? I'm worried about you." He hesitated. He needed allies, and Mai was perhaps the person he trusted most professionally. Still, bringing anyone into his plan carried risks. "Coffee tomorrow morning? Before the office," he suggested. They met at 6 a.m. in a small cafe far from their usual haunts. Mai arrived first, a folder tucked under her arm, concern evident in her expression. "You're not having a breakdown," she said immediately, sliding the folder toward him. "You're planning something." Inside were notes she'd made, observations about his behavior, the missing designs, Elise's increasing time with Julian, and financial discrepancies she'd noticed in project accounts she helped manage. Robert studied her face, then made his decision. "How secure is your apartment?" That evening in Mai's living room, Robert revealed everything: the theft of his designs, the financial fraud, the gaslighting, and his developing plan for revenge. Mai listened without interruption, her expression moving from shock to anger to calculated resolve. "They deserve everything that's coming to them," she said finally. "What do you need from me?" With Mai's help, Robert approached Professor Hargrove next. The meeting took place at the professor's lakeside home, where the elderly man listened with growing outrage to Robert's evidence. "In 40 years of teaching, I've seen plagiarism, I've seen betrayal, but never something this calculated," Hargrove said, his hands trembling slightly. "Julian Reed always was an ambitious fraud with minimal talent. But Elise, I'd never have suspected." "I need your discretion, Professor," Robert said, "and eventually your testimony about the originality of my work." "You have both, unquestionably." The older man placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. Your mother raised you with integrity. These vultures won't take that from you. With his small circle of trusted allies established, Robert implemented the next phase of his plan. At home, he left the false designs prominently displayed on his desk, complete with post-it notes highlighting the revolutionary aspects. He began taking sleeping pills, actual pills, as he needed to appear genuinely medicated, ensuring he would sleep deeply enough for Elise to explore his office undisturbed. At the apartment, he and Mai prepared the documentation proving the true timeline of his work. They created redundant copies of all evidence, stored in separate secure locations. Robert began working on his actual new project, truly innovative designs without the deliberate flaws, developing them in absolute secrecy. 3 weeks into this charade, Elise made her move. Robert returned home to find her packing a suitcase, her expression set in rehearsed sympathy. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing toward the living room. He played his part perfectly, sinking into the couch with the defeated posture he'd been practicing for weeks. "I can't do this anymore, Robert," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not the man I agreed to marry. These mood swings, the paranoia, the accusations about Julian, it's too much." "I can change," he said, allowing his voice to crack. "I'll get help." She shook her head sadly. "I've already found an apartment. I think we need time apart while you focus on your health." "You're leaving me?" He injected just the right amount of pathetic disbelief into his voice. "It's for the best," she said, reaching for his hand but stopping short of actually touching him. "I'll always care about you, Robert, but I need stability." He watched her pack the remaining items, including, as he'd anticipated, several folders from his office containing the flawed designs. He pretended not to notice, instead asking broken questions about whether she still loved him, whether they might reconcile later. Each pitiful inquiry seemed to strengthen her resolve to leave, exactly as he'd intended. After she left, Robert allowed himself a single genuine moment of grief. Despite knowing the truth, watching her walk out their door, carrying the last 3 years of his life in a designer suitcase still hurt. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Mai. She took the bait. That night, he slept at his secret apartment, falling into the first truly restful sleep he had in weeks. The trap was set, and his prey had taken the first step inside. It took only 4 days for Julian and Elise to make their next move. Robert, maintaining his facade of depression, spotted it immediately. A small announcement in the industry newsletter about Julian Reed joining forces with Elise Chambers to form Reed Innovation Architecture, with a groundbreaking sustainable design concept, soon to be unveiled. 2 weeks later, while meeting with Professor Hargrove, Robert learned the full extent of their audacity. "They've secured $15 million in funding from the Westlake Committee," Hargrove said, disgust evident in his voice. "Using your designs, the very ones intended for that project." Julian presented yesterday, with Elise handling the marketing pitch. "I was there as a consultant." "Did you recognize the designs?" Robert asked, maintaining his composure. "Immediately. What's more concerning is the timeline they're proposing. They want to break ground in 3 months, with a complete build in 18. It's absurdly ambitious, especially given the supposed complexity of the systems." Robert nodded slowly. "They're rushing because they're afraid I might eventually expose them. They need to establish precedent quickly." He paused, calculating. "Did they incorporate all elements of the design, including the cantilevered section and the integrated water reclamation system?" "Every bit of it." Julian spoke about them as if they were his life's work. A small smile touched Robert's lips. "Perfect." The following morning, the architecture world was buzzing. Design Forward magazine had published an exclusive feature on Reed Innovation Architecture's revolutionary approach to urban sustainability, featuring Julian's stolen designs, Robert's deliberately flawed creations, prominently displayed across 8 glossy pages. The article praised Julian's visionary integration of form and function, and quoted Elise extensively on the transformative potential of the design. Industry leaders were already expressing excitement about the project, with preliminary reviews calling it potentially field-changing and a new standard in sustainable urban development. Robert read the article carefully at his secret apartment, noting every quoted expert and industry response. Mai sat across from him, scrolling through online reactions. "They're celebrities overnight," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. The Architectural Review is calling Julian the new face of sustainable design. Sustainability Monthly wants him for their cover. Robert set down the magazine, his expression calm. "Good. The higher they rise now, the further they'll fall later." "Are you sure the flaws won't be discovered before construction starts?" May asked. I designed them to withstand preliminary review, Robert explained. The problems only become apparent under specific load simulations that won't be conducted until after the foundation is laid. By then, Julian will have staked his entire reputation on the project's success. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline he knew so intimately. My father used to say that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served at precisely the right temperature, at exactly the moment your enemy has fully committed to taking a bite. Behind him, May added a new printout to their evidence wall, the Design Forward article, now marked with annotations identifying each stolen element. What's next? She asked. Robert turned back to her, his eyes reflecting not the defeated man Elise thought she left behind, but an architect who had never been more in control of his design. Now, he said, we disappear completely. I need to be so professionally invisible that when I reappear, it will be with maximum impact. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Westlake Sustainability Tower was a spectacle of environmental pageantry. Biodegradable confetti, speeches about urban renewal, and champagne in compostable flutes. Julian Reed stood center stage in an impeccably tailored suit, golden shovel in hand, while Elise managed the media with practiced charm. Construction equipment gleamed in the background, ready to begin excavation the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Robert watched the live stream from his secret apartment, studying Julian's confident gestures as he described his revolutionary design concepts. The same concepts Robert had deliberately sabotaged. They're using recycled steel from the original structure, I noted, sitting beside him with her laptop open to the project specifications. Exactly as you predicted. Robert nodded. The recycled steel works perfectly with properly calculated load distributions. With my altered calculations, the stress points will develop microscopic fractures within 6 months of completion. The next morning, Architectural Digest published a glowing profile of Julian Reed, celebrating his meteoric rise and paradigm-shifting approach to sustainable urban design. The article mentioned his new relationship with marketing executive Elise Chambers only briefly, focusing instead on his apparent genius. There was a single reference to Robert, describing him as Reed's former competitor, who has reportedly stepped back from design work due to personal issues. Stepped back. As if he'd made a choice rather than been systematically undermined and robbed. As predicted, Robert's professional isolation grew more profound with each passing week. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. Invitations to industry events mysteriously disappeared. His membership status in the Sustainable Architecture Coalition was changed to inactive without notice. When he called to question this, the administrator mentioned something vague about concerns raised about recent behavior. One evening, Matt arrived at the apartment visibly upset, clutching printouts from Horizon Design's website. They'd changed the project credits, she said, spreading the pages across the desk. The Emerald Tower, the Bailey Museum expansion, even the Franklin Park redesign, they've removed your name as lead architect. They're listing you as contributing designer on projects you conceived and executed. Robert examined the pages. His achievements, the work that had defined his career, were being systematically erased. Julian's influence, he said quietly. He's convincing people I'm unstable, unreliable, making it easier to claim my work without pushback. What May didn't know was that Robert's financial situation was becoming equally precarious. After Elise's systematic draining of their joint accounts, his remaining funds were dwindling rapidly. The rent on his secret apartment, private investigator fees, and his self-imposed professional exile had left his savings critically low. He'd been forced to sell his car and had begun liquidating investment accounts he'd hoped to preserve. When he checked his mailbox at his primary residence, now mainly vacant, he found a formal letter from Reed Innovation Architecture's attorneys. The cease and desist notice threatened immediate legal action if he continued making defamatory claims regarding Julian Reed's original work. Apparently, Robert's discreet inquiries to former professors and colleagues about his design history had not gone unnoticed. The letter ended with a particularly cruel twist. Furthermore, Ms. Chambers has reported concerning behavior that may require restraining order proceedings should it continue. He hadn't attempted to contact Elise even once. Robert placed the letter in his evidence file, another piece in the growing documentation of their maneuvers. But the psychological toll was mounting. Each day brought new evidence of Julian and Elise's success built on his ruins. At a coffee shop near his old office, Robert overheard 2 junior architects from Horizon Designs discussing him. I heard he had some kind of breakdown, one said. started accusing everyone of stealing his work, even claimed Elise was spying on him. Classic paranoia, the other replied. Shame about his talent, though. Those cantilever systems in the Emerald Tower were brilliant. Well, Julian Reed's doing similar work now, and without the psychological drama. Robert remained still, cup halfway to his lips, as his former colleagues continued discussing his supposed mental decline. The betrayal had expanded beyond Elise and Julian. It now included an entire professional community that had accepted their narrative without question. That evening, he sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by evidence that increasingly felt pointless. The construction of the Westlake Tower was proceeding ahead of schedule. Julian had been named Designer of the Year by Sustainable Building Quarterly. Elise had launched a TED talk about marketing revolutionary architecture. Their stars were rising as his reputation crumbled. For the first time, Robert questioned whether his plan for revenge was worth the cost. He could go public now with his evidence, force a messy confrontation. It might not restore everything he'd lost, but it would at least stop their ascent. He could rebuild elsewhere, perhaps in another city where Julian's influence was weaker. His phone rang, Professor Hargrove, one of the few remaining connections to his former life. Robert, have you seen the announcement? The elderly man's voice was tense. Which one? Robert asked, fatigue evident in his voice. The Global Architecture Forum is hosting a special showcase next month. Julian and Elise are the featured presenters, unveiling the full Westlake design to international industry leaders. Robert sat straighter. The Global Forum? That's unprecedented for an unfinished project. Julian has connections on the board. They're billing it as a paradigm shift in sustainable design. Everyone who matters in global architecture will be there. The Global Architecture Forum was the most prestigious industry event of the year, attended by the world's leading architects, developers, and critics. A successful presentation would cement Julian's stolen reputation permanently. When exactly? Robert asked, already reaching for his planning calendar. 3 weeks from Thursday. Robert, I have to ask, are you still proceeding with your plan? The professional damage you'd sustained is substantial, Robert finished. I know. I've been questioning it myself tonight. There was a long pause before Hargrove spoke again. Your mother faced a similar situation once, did I ever tell you? Not architectural theft, but a client who tried to avoid payment by claiming her restaurant design was fundamentally flawed. They nearly bankrupted her. I didn't know that, Robert said quietly. She could have settled, taken the partial payment they offered. Instead, she waited until their opening night, then arrived with documentation proving they had altered her original plans, creating the very flaws they complained about. The evidence was irrefutable. What happened? They had to publicly retract their claims, pay her in full plus damages. More importantly, her reputation was not just restored but enhanced. Integrity made visible is powerful, Robert. After they hung up, Robert stood at his window, watching the distant lights of construction cranes working through the night on Julian's stolen tower. His tower. His flawed creation, designed to fail at precisely the right moment. The Global Architecture Forum would have every major player in the industry present. The exact audience he needed for maximum impact. If he abandoned his plan now, he might salvage some portion of his career, but Julian and Elise would triumph completely. Their betrayal would be rewarded with international acclaim. Robert turned back to his desk, to the true designs he'd been developing in secret. Unlike the flawed plans Julian had stolen, these were genuine innovations, carefully documented with time-stamped development notes, witnessed by Hargrove and Mai at every critical stage. His phone buzzed with a text from Mai. Are you seeing this email? Global Forum announcement. This changes our timeline. Robert replied, No, it perfects it. He felt a renewed sense of purpose as he reviewed his evidence files. The mounting costs, financial, professional, emotional, were substantial. But walking away now would mean Julian and Elise had won completely. Their betrayal would stand as the foundation of their success. That was a cost Robert wasn't willing to pay. Some principles were worth fighting for, even at great personal expense. His mother had taught him that integrity wasn't just about doing the right thing when it was easy, but standing firm when it was hardest. Robert opened his laptop and began drafting an email to Professor Hargrove. The Global Architecture Forum would indeed showcase a paradigm shift in sustainable design, just not the one Julian and Elise were expecting. The morning after Professor Hargrove's call about the Global Architecture Forum, Robert invited his mentor to his secret apartment. The elderly professor surveyed the evidence-covered walls with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've been thorough," Hargrove said, adjusting his glasses as he examined the financial records and design timelines. "But at what personal cost?" Robert poured coffee for them both. "I've been asking myself the same question, whether it's worth it." Hargrove settled into the apartment's single comfortable chair, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug. "Your mother faced her own crucible in this industry. Did I ever tell you about the Chen Miek restaurant project? You mentioned it briefly yesterday. A client tried to avoid payment by claiming her design was flawed." "It was more than that," Hargrove said, his voice taking on the measured cadence he used when teaching important principles. "Sophia Chen was still establishing her reputation when she designed that restaurant. The client was a powerful real estate developer who decided midway through construction that he wanted to use a different architect for his next project, a much larger one. Rather than simply telling her, he tried to destroy her professional credibility by altering her designs during construction, then blaming her for the resulting problems." Robert sat across from him, listening intently. He'd heard stories about his mother's professional challenges, but never this one. They'd offered her a settlement, 20 cents on the dollar, and a non-disclosure agreement that would have prevented her from defending her work. Every advisor told her to take it. The legal fees would exceed what she was owed, and finding a wealthy client would blacklist her with other potential clients. "But she didn't take it," Robert said softly. "No. Your mother said something I've never forgotten. If I accept their lie about my work, I'm accepting a lie about who I am." She documented everything, waited for their grand opening, and presented irrefutable evidence of their tampering. The contrast between their altered implementation and her original design was so obvious that even non-architects could see the truth. Robert studied his mentor's face. What happened? The developer was humiliated. Not only did he have to pay her full fee plus damages, but several other clients who had been considering his properties backed out. Your mother didn't just win a battle over money. She demonstrated that integrity is itself a professional asset. Her business thrived afterward precisely because clients knew she wouldn't compromise her standards or her truth. Hargrove leaned forward, his eyes steady on Robert's. "You're her son in more ways than your talent, Robert. She'd be proud of your refusal to let them steal not just your designs, but your professional identity." Something solidified in Robert's chest, a certainty that had been wavering under the accumulated weight of losses. "Thank you for telling me that story. Just remember what she used to say about revenge," Hargrove added, rising to leave. "It's only worth pursuing if it leaves you better than you were before." That afternoon, Robert worked with renewed focus on his legitimate design project, a truly revolutionary approach to urban sustainability that went far beyond what Julian had stolen. Where the stolen designs incorporated clever but conventional sustainable elements, Robert's authentic work reimagined the relationship between buildings and their environments completely. He had been developing these concepts for months, documenting every stage with meticulous care. Mai had witnessed key development points, signing and dating each major iteration. Professor Hargrove had provided periodic consultations, also carefully documented. Together, they had created an ironclad record, proving these designs were not only Robert's but represented his most forward-thinking work to date. "The contrasting anchor system is brilliant," Mai said, reviewing his latest modifications. "It solves the wind tunnel effect that plagues most downtown high-rises while generating usable energy. And it's impossible to derive from the flawed designs Julian stole," Robert added. "No one making those corrections would arrive at this solution." He worked through the night, refining details and preparing presentation materials that would be ready for the forum. Not to present himself, Julian and Elise held that coveted spot, but to present afterward when the moment was right. The following day might arrive with surprising news. She'd been quietly investigating Elise's financial activities at Horizon Designs and discovered a pattern extending beyond Robert's accounts. "She's been skimming from client billing," Mai explained, spreading documentation across Robert's desk. "Small amounts for multiple projects, disguised as vendor payments to shell companies. I tracked 3 different accounts, all ultimately linked to her and Julian." Robert examined the evidence. "How many projects?" "At least 7 over the past 2 years, including work you are directly involved with." "So their betrayal wasn't just personal. It's their standard operating procedure." "It gets worse," Mai continued. 2 of these projects involved Anderson Development Group." Robert looked up sharply. James Anderson was one of the most influential developers in the Pacific Northwest, known for his zero-tolerance policy on ethical violations. He was also confirmed to attend the Global Architecture Forum. Anderson needs to see this, Robert said. Along with every other major client and investor, we'll be at the forum. Already working on it, Matt replied with a small smile. I've compiled dossiers for each major attendee, highlighting the specific information most relevant to their interests. Anderson's focuses on the financial fraud. For the Sustainable Building Council members, I've emphasized the design theft and deliberate flaws. Robert nodded appreciatively. We need to ensure they're all present for Julian and Alyssa's presentation. I've thought about that too. Mai pulled out her phone, showing Robert an email from Global Forum organizers. I've secured a position on the volunteer staff of the event. I'll be able to move freely and make sure key people are in the room. Over the next 2 weeks, they refined their approach. Professor Hargrove arranged a meeting with Catherine Lin, executive editor of Architectural Integrity, a respected journal known for its investigative coverage of industry issues. The meeting took place in a private room at the university library. Lin, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for journalistic thoroughness, reviewed their evidence with professional skepticism. This is compelling, she acknowledged after 2 hours, but going public has risks for you, Mr. Stark. Even with this documentation, many will see this as a personal vendetta against a former partner and professional rival. It is personal, Robert admitted, but it's also about professional standards that affect our entire industry. How many other architects have had their work stolen because speaking up seemed too costly? Lynn studied him thoughtfully. You've clearly suffered significant professional damage already. Why not publish this evidence now? Why wait for the forum? Because architecture isn't just about documents and technical specifications, Robert explained. It's about the final built reality. Julian and Elise have presented stolen, deliberately flawed designs as revolutionary. At the forum, they'll be making their grandest claims before their most prestigious audience. The contrast between their deception and the truth will be unmistakable. Lynn closed her notebook. I'll attend the forum. If events confirm your claims, Architectural Integrity will publish a special investigation. I can't promise anything more. That's all I ask, Robert replied. Just be there to witness what happens. As the forum approached, Robert focused on psychological preparation. The confrontation would require perfect timing and emotional control. He practiced his planned statements, anticipating Julian and Alyssa's likely responses. He visualized the room, the audience, the moment of revelation. Mai helped him select his clothing, a tailored charcoal suit that conveyed both professionalism and the gravity of someone who had been through difficult times. Not the flashy attire Julian favored, but the understated elegance of an architect who let his work speak for itself. The night before the showcase, Robert sat alone in his apartment, reviewing everything one last time. The evidence was organized in a leather portfolio: financial records, design documentation, witness statements, technical analyses of the flawed designs Julian had stolen. Next to it sat a slim case containing digital files of his legitimate revolutionary designs, ready to be projected if needed. On his phone were confirmation messages from key industry figures who would be present: James Anderson, the Sustainable Building Council chair, 3 international investors, and the dean of his former architecture school. Professor Hargrove would be seated prominently. Catherine Lin had confirmed her attendance. Matt would be on site early, positioned to guide events as needed. Everything was in place. Yet Robert felt a moment of unexpected sadness. Tomorrow would bring a form of justice, but it wouldn't restore the 3 years with Elise that had been built on deception. It wouldn't erase the months of professional isolation and financial strain. Some losses couldn't be recovered. He picked up a framed photograph of his mother, the only personal item he'd brought to this temporary space. Sophia Chen stood beside her first major building, pride evident in her posture despite her exhaustion. She had taught him that architecture wasn't just about creating spaces, but about shaping integrity into physical form. Some compromises weakened the entire structure. Robert placed the photograph carefully in his briefcase, alongside his evidence and designs. Tomorrow wasn't just about revenge. It was about demonstrating that in architecture, as in life, integrity was the only foundation worth building upon. He sent a final text to Mai, all set for tomorrow. Her reply came immediately. Everything in place. Rest well. Tomorrow we rebuild. Robert turned out the lights and lay down, mind finally quiet. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would face it as his mother's son, with principle, precision, and the patience of someone who understood that the most important structural elements were often invisible until they were tested. The grand ballroom of the Harbour View Hotel, buzzed with anticipation as architectural elites from around the world gathered for the Global Architecture Forum's showcase event. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled crowd of designers, developers, critics, and investors. An atmosphere of refined excitement permeated the room as attendees took their seats, programs detailing revolutionary sustainable design. The Westlake Tower, clutched in manicured hands. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Julian Reed strode confidently onto the stage in a designer suit, his signature red pocket square adding a dramatic splash of color. Elise followed, elegant in a tailored emerald dress, her auburn hair swept into a sophisticated updo. They made a striking pair, successful, polished, and radiating the easy confidence of people accustomed to admiration. Distinguished colleagues, Julian began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Today marks a paradigm shift in sustainable urban architecture. What we're about to present isn't merely a building, but a new philosophy of integrated environmental design. From the back of the ballroom, Robert Stark watched silently, dressed in his charcoal suit, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Mai stood nearby in her forum volunteer uniform, discreetly confirming the presence of key industry figures with small nods to Robert. Professor Hargrove was seated in the third row, his posture rigid with anticipation. Catherine Lynn from Architectural Integrity had positioned herself near the central aisle, notebook ready. On stage, Julian advanced through a series of impressive renderings of the Westlake Tower, highlighting its revolutionary features with practiced eloquence. Elise seamlessly took over to explain the marketing narrative, describing how the building would transform public perception of sustainable architecture. The cantilever system you see here, Julian continued, indicating a complex structural element on the display screen, represents a completely original approach to load distribution that simultaneously maximizes natural light penetration and creates self-shading during peak temperature hours. Robert felt a cold anger as Julian described, in technical detail, concepts Robert had developed over years of research, concepts he had deliberately sabotaged in the stolen designs. When Julian announced they would take questions following a short break, Robert nodded to Mai. It was time. As attendees mingled during the intermission, Robert made his way to the stage access point where Mai had positioned herself. With a volunteer badge, she escorted him through security to the presentation control area. "Their technical director is on break," she whispered. "We have 4 minutes." Robert quickly connected his own device to the presentation system, navigating through security with access codes Mai had obtained. He uploaded 2 parallel presentation files, one containing analysis of Julian's stolen designs, another showcasing his legitimate work. When Julian and Elise returned to the stage, neither noticed the subtle change in the presentation controller's display. Julian picked up his presentation remote and smiled confidently at the reassembling audience. "Now to demonstrate the practical implications of our innovation, we'd prepared detailed structural analysis." Julian clicked to advance his slide, but instead of his prepared materials, the screen displayed a side-by-side comparison, Julian's original design, next to Robert's earlier sketches, dated and notarized months before Julian claimed to have conceived them. Confusion crossed Julian's face. He clicked again. Another comparison appeared, this time showing financial records from Robert's accounts flowing to offshore holdings connected to Julian and Elise. A murmur rippled through the audience. Julian frantically clicked the remote, each press revealing more damning evidence. "There appears to be a technical issue," Elise interjected smoothly, moving toward the podium. "If we could have a moment, too." "There's no technical issue," Robert stated clearly, walking down the center aisle toward the stage. "Those are your financial records, Elise, showing how you and Julian systematically drained my accounts while stealing my designs." The room fell silent as Robert mounted the steps to the stage, Julian's face contorted with anger and fear. Elise froze, her professional smile faltering. "Robert Stark," Julian managed, attempting to regain control. "I believe you're interrupting a private event. Security." "I have full credentials for this event," Robert replied calmly, gesturing to the badge Mai had provided. "And I believe the audience deserves to know the truth about what they're being shown." Robert turned to address the stunned audience directly. "Many of you knew me before I disappeared from professional circles. You've heard rumors about mental health issues, erratic behavior. What you haven't heard is that these 2 individuals systematically stole my work while gaslighting me about my own stability." He moved to the presentation console and advanced to a new slide. a detailed structural analysis of the Westlake design Julian had presented. "The design you've just been shown isn't merely stolen, it's fatally flawed," Robert explained, highlighting specific elements. The cantilever system Julian described so eloquently would fail catastrophically under standard load conditions. The water reclamation system would create mold issues throughout the building within 18 months. The solar array positioning would achieve approximately 40% of projected energy production. Gasps and mutters spread through the audience. James Anderson, the influential developer, stood up from his front row seat. "Are you claiming these flaws were inadvertent copying errors?" "No," Robert replied, meeting his gaze. "They were deliberate. I created these flawed designs knowing Julian and Alice would steal them. Each flaw is subtle enough to pass preliminary review, but significant enough to create massive structural and functional problems once construction was underway." The ballroom erupted in shocked conversations. Julian lunged toward Robert, only to be blocked by Professor Hargrove, who had moved quickly to the stage. "This is absurd," Julian sputtered. "You're making accusations without proof because you're jealous of our success." "I have proof," Robert countered, nodding to Matt, who distributed folders to key industry figures in the front rows. Complete documentation of the theft, the financial fraud, and the deliberate flaws. But more importantly, he advanced to a new section of the presentation, revealing an entirely different architectural concept. "This is my actual work, developed in secret over the past months, documented at every stage, witnessed and verified by respected professionals, including Professor Hargrove. The designs that appeared on screen were breathtaking, a genuinely revolutionary approach to sustainable urban architecture that made Julian's stolen concept look pedestrian by comparison. Where Julian's design merely incorporated conventional green elements, Robert's reimagined the fundamental relationship between structure, environment, and human experience. Every element has been thoroughly tested and verified," Robert continued, advancing through detailed technical specifications. "Unlike the flawed designs Mr. Reed presented, these would not only function as promised, but exceed current sustainability standards by 47%. Catherine Lynn stood. "Mr. Stark, are you suggesting you deliberately allowed your reputation to be destroyed as part of an elaborate trap?" "I allowed my designs to be stolen," Robert clarified. "I didn't anticipate the extent to which Mr. Reed and Miss Chambers would attempt to erase my professional history or spread rumors about my stability. But yes, I chose to wait for this moment, when they would make their grandest claims before their most discerning audience, to reveal the truth." The next hour unfolded like a controlled demolition of Julian and Alyssa's carefully constructed facade. As industry leaders examined Robert's evidence, Julian's attempts at denial grew increasingly desperate. Alice, reading the room more accurately, fell silent, her expression hardening into resignation. James Anderson approached the stage, folder in hand. "These financial records indicate funds were diverted from my company's projects as well. I'll be pursuing full criminal charges." He turned to Robert. "Mr. Stark, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your legitimate designs." By the time security finally escorted a shouting Julian from the ballroom, the professional verdict was clear. Investors who had backed the Westlake project publicly withdrew their support. The Sustainable Building Council chair announced an immediate review of Julian's professional credentials. Catherine Lynn was already drafting what would become a landmark investigative piece for architectural integrity. Robert stood in the eye of this storm, maintaining his composure as former colleagues approached with apologies and renewed respect. Professor Hargrove remained beside him, a steady presence amid the chaos. 6 months later, Robert stood at a different groundbreaking ceremony. The site, formerly designated for Julian's stolen Westlake Tower, now featured plans for the Synthesis, Robert's legitimate revolutionary design, fully funded by a consortium led by James Anderson. As Robert addressed the gathered crowd, he noted how different this audience was from the one that had witnessed Julian and Alyssa's downfall. Many faces were the same, but the energy had transformed from fashionable curiosity to genuine professional admiration. "Architecture isn't just about creating buildings," Robert said, concluding his remarks. "It's about creating integrity in physical form. Every beam, every support, every connection must be honest and true to its purpose. The moment we compromise that integrity, the entire structure is at risk." After the ceremony, as attendees mingled at the reception, a woman approached Robert. She introduced herself as Dr. Amara Chen, a structural engineer specializing in seismic resilience. "Your cantilever system is remarkable," she said, her dark eyes reflecting genuine interest. "I have some thoughts about enhancing its earthquake response capabilities, if you're open to collaboration." "I'm always open to making strong structures stronger," Robert replied, finding himself engaged by her straightforward manner and obvious expertise. As they discussed technical details, Robert realized this was the first conversation with a potential romantic interest that had felt natural since Elise. Dr. Chen spoke about integrity in engineering with the same conviction he felt about architecture. When she mentioned admiring how he had handled the Julian Reed situation, choosing precision over speed, substance over spectacle, he felt a connection that had nothing to do with his recent vindication. They exchanged contact information with professional courtesy, but the warmth in their handshake suggested possibilities beyond technical collaboration. Later that evening, Robert sat at his desk in his newly established office. The space was minimalist but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city he had always loved designing for. On his desk stood a framed photograph of his parents, his father in his chef's jacket, his mother in front of her first major building, their pride and principles having guided him through his darkest times. He opened his sketchbook, beginning work on refinements to the synthesis based on Dr. Chen's insightful suggestions. As his pencil moved across the paper, Robert reflected on how the betrayal had ultimately made him stronger, not just professionally, but as a person. He had discovered a resilience he hadn't known he possessed, a capacity to plan and execute with precision even under extreme pressure. The city lights glimmered beyond his window, a constellation of possibilities. Robert's gaze moved from his parents' photograph to his evolving design, then out toward the horizon. The future extending before him now was not the one he had once imagined with Elise, but something more authentic, built on a foundation of hard-won integrity. Like any well-designed structure, it promised to stand the test of time.